Oh, you don't have to try and figure it out. You're all looking at it and trying to figure it out. Ralph, can you get it? Or Todd, can you get this online? All right, perfect. How many of you have been to a wine and paint event or just a fun group paint night? Hands, anybody's been to them? Yeah, for those who may not have been to one, there are commercial places you can go with friends, and sometimes there are community events, maybe at the library or church, to have a fun group painting night. You get a blank canvas and some paint, and usually all of you are trying to create the same painting with instructions from an art teacher, right? This amazing piece of art came from one of those events. When I was an intern at Open Spirit in Framingham, we had a resident artist. They had their studio in our building, and we would offer art. They would offer art classes and art events periodically throughout the year. We also supported their public art installations around Metro West. It was a wonderful relationship. On this particular paint night, we had no instructions for what to paint. The art teacher said, just play with some shapes and let your mind wander. Well, when you tell an accounting-trained software project manager to let her mind wander, this is what you get. I could not let go of symmetry. Do you see that? And I was afraid to blend colors. This is as much as my mind wanders. I keep this painting in my office at home to remind me of that night, because I learned a big lesson about my faith that night. As I was painstakingly trying to nonchalantly place random swirls on my painting, a bunch of the artist's friends showed up. They were all young art students from Boston. This one woman sat up next to me, and she pulled out what I would call a house painting brush, right? Like this. And she filled big buckets of paint. And she started boldly slapping paint onto the canvas in all different directions. There was like just this complete freedom in her movement, almost violence as to how she put it onto the canvas. I was mesmerized by this. And you would think her actions would have given me freedom to do the same, but no. It looked like so much fun. But yeah, I left that bold art to the trained artist, right? I kept randomly placing my little swirls and my lines randomly. She stopped and looked at her painting, and she left it for a while. She went over and chatted with some friends. I heard her say she was letting it dry. I was like, oh, well, that was a short paint night, right? I looked over at it with jealousy. It was beautiful. She just threw it up there. It was beautiful. I assumed that she had been taught how to do it right. Some technique that her mass art tuition had paid for her to know. After like 10 minutes, she came back over and looked at the painting, surveyed it. And here's the real shocker. She took that brush again and more paint, and she just kept slapping more paint onto it. She completely covered the original painting with new paint. I know, Nicolette. She made a whole new painting. And here's the kicker, it was beautiful too. I was like, what? Layers and layers of paint just thrown on. I was shocked. What about the first beautiful painting? You just ruined it and made another one on top of it. That's not right. That was when I realized that she was not just a different kind of artist, not just someone who was trained and more talented than I. She was a different kind of person than I. She was someone who could stop in her tracks and just pivot in a new direction. Listen to the Spirit. Just move through life to the rhythm of that day or that moment. What made us different? I don't know exactly. But one word jumped into my mind that night. Trust. And that changed my faith journey. Trust the pivot, Fran. Trust that you can paint over the already beautiful painting because maybe it's not the final painting. Faith. Trust in things unseen. Like the next bold stroke with the big brush. Right? This is the spirit of our reading today, as Andy said. Paul had a plan. He had a trip to Asia all figured out. And that wasn't an easy thing to do in 40-something AD. There were supplies and tents and water, maybe pre-arrangements for animals and lodgings. It was not easy to wake up after a dream and say, let's go to Greece instead. And yet, they, Paul and his companions, they were open to the pivot. All the expectations they had about accomplishments in Asia were abandoned. No worry about what could have been in Asia. Greece is now our destination. They abandoned a land trip and jumped on a boat. You can't get any different than that. They went to an island. I think it's funny that we never mentioned that. They went to an island first and then popped over to the next shore, right? The story then focuses on how they met Lydia outside of this large Roman city and how Lydia also pivoted, converted her whole household to follow Paul, follow Jesus' teachings. Her wealth helped Paul to continue his travels. That purple cloth. The new trip ended up being 2,800 miles. 2,800 miles. And it introduced Jesus' story and teachings to Europe for the first time. It also led Paul and Silas to being arrested. We skipped that part of the story. We didn't go on to that part of the story this time. And their prison guard also converted his family and followed Paul's teachings, Jesus' teachings. I don't think Paul anticipated any of that when he changed his plans. And yet, he listened, boldly pivoted, and lived out a new calling, causing more people to pivot and find a new calling. Trust in things unseen. That's faith. So back to the painting. Whenever I look at this painting, I remember that night. I remember how constricted my strokes were, how worried I was about getting it right, how afraid I was of the judgment of others, how I just couldn't let go and follow a creative process. Just trust. When I look at the painting, I say to myself, Fran, are you limiting yourself now? What are you up to? Are you still trying to randomly place swirls on your canvas? Are you going to grab the big brush and make some bold movements, right? How about you all? Perhaps this is ringing true for some of you. So I wanted to stop and give us a moment to listen. Let's we have some postcards around, and we can get more postcards around if you don't have one, and some pens. And we're just going to take a moment, just jot down what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what's bubbling up in this conversation, right? If you had a blank canvas, which brush would you take? Which bucket of paint would you reach into? Is there someone who could walk into your life today and shake up the way you see life, the way you see the world, the way you see God? How do you invite that person into your life? Is there a vision, a dream that is calling you in a different direction? Let's just take some time. Sure, yeah. So we're just, after what we just said about broad brushes and trusting the process of creativity, hearing things that bubble up, let's just write down what's bubbling up in our brains. So no specific questions, just as anything bubbling up. For some people, something might not be bubbling up, who knows? Maybe it'll come up next Tuesday afternoon instead. That's fine. Just take a few minutes to listen. God's dream includes all of creation, all of the possibilities. When we live in God's dream, we're playing with the big brushes. We're playing with an infinite color palette. Oh, that is scary. And it's absolute freedom. Blessings on the journey, my friends. Blessings on the journey. Amen.